So Trump went on Joe Rogan's podcast for a 3-hour conversation, and it has gained over 35 million views in 2 days. That's just insane. And honestly, I watch Joe Rogan a lot. I have never seen him so focused on one of his conversations, except for maybe something to do with UFC or his martial arts stuff. They talked about the media coverage of Trump, environmental issues with overregulation. Rogan had to definitely bring Trump back around to the question a couple times because he kind of weaved some stories in there and got a little bit lost. They talked about wars, how people compare Trump to Hitler, Russian collusion, and honestly, the list goes on. But now to set the record straight, I am not a Trump or a Kamala fan, and I think that we are in a pretty bad position regardless of who wins the president. But I did watch the entire video twice to make sure I didn't miss anything, and I have a lot to break down for you today. So let's dive in. So Rogan started the episode talking about the juxtaposition between the media coverage of Trump in 2016 versus the media coverage of now, referring to people always being like positive towards Trump, calling him a friend, and then all of a sudden he decided to become president, and like that, they kind of turn on him. They flip their script. One of the examples they brought up was like women from The View, like Joy Behar, but they didn't play the clip. So I'm gonna go ahead and show you the clips. Check this out.
Donald couldn't be nicer to me. Oh, it's so nice to see you,
Even
Melania.
all the stuff you guys have said about him on The View.
I haven't said anything that bad. The worst thing I ever said to him about him was that he's not the worst one.
So that first clip you just watched was Joy Behar in 2015 being super nice about Trump, saying pow, saying he's always been nice to me. I saw him at the Adele concert. My husband wanted me to talk to him. But now, take a look at this clip from just a few days ago.
If people still follow this fascist pig, then I don't know what else to say.
It's like as soon as he flipped into a position that had high media coverage, they wanted to join in and collect their revenue by following the opinions that garners the most views, the most controversial stuff. They continue providing other examples of that. They talked about his show The Apprentice for a little bit, and then Rogan started getting into his real question. He asked about what it was like on day one when he first got into office, knowing that Trump is not a politician. He's not really ever governed anything except for in the private sectors, right? So he wanted to know what was that day one like. Trump kind of began rambling a little bit about it being surreal, visiting the Lincoln bedroom, and he got really obsessed with that. Let's watch.
And I said to the guys, I want to see the Lincoln bedroom. I had never seen the Lincoln bedroom. I'd heard about the Lincoln bedroom. I said, do you believe it? This is the Lincoln bedroom. That room was so beautiful to me. He lost his son, and they suffered. The two of them suffered from melancholia. Look, he was in a war. He was having a hard time because he couldn't beat Robert E. Lee.
I do think it was pretty cool that we got to see Trump talk like this, with great admiration of a past president's legacy. It showed he's actually interested in parts of the history of the country, but it did not answer the question. So Rogan did repeat or rephrase that question multiple times to try and bring him back.
Everyone's aware of all this stuff, but what I want to get to is like, what was the experience once you got inside?
So you can see there that Rogan is like, yeah, we know all the history stuff. We know all that. Can you just answer my question? And so Trump does attempt to answer it. I don't think he does a good job. He rambles a little bit, but he did end up talking about having two goals. First one was running the country, and the second one was survival. And then they circle back and try to hammer home that idea that things really didn't switch for him in the media until he ran for president. I mean, before that, he was only a political donor, right? He backed both sides of the political spectrum within his life. He's done Republican and Democrat. He did primarily Democrats when he was younger until the early 1990s, which is when he made his switch to that Republican Party. So Joe moves on to his next point and kind of asks him how he got acclimated to making decisions as the president. And Trump responds saying that he had a lot to rely on, a lot of people around him, whether he liked them or not. So clearly he did not like some of them. But one point he quickly glazed over that I wish Rogan delved into was like the types of people who have run for office in the past. Take a listen to this.
Over the years, all those presidents, you've had 92% were politicians and 8% were generals.
Now, this could have been a really great moment to dive into how this plays into his campaign. I wish I heard more about Trump being an entertainer and a businessman and how that's a better fit for the country rather than like a thoroughbred politician who plays the political games of their party, because it definitely runs a risk both ways. And he dives into it a little bit, but not much at all. Trump kind of just says he was an outsider. He had to rely on people that were already indoctrinated into this political system, and it did pose a pretty big challenge for him. He even said that was his biggest mistake.
The biggest mistake I made was I picked some people that I shouldn't have picked. I picked a few people that I shouldn't have picked.
Like that rambling. I picked some people. I picked a few people. We know. So he's saying he just picked bad people. That was his biggest mistake. He had to rely on a bunch because he didn't know many that were indoctrinated into the system. So the people that were around him were really helping him make those decisions. Not so much he was picking the bad people, but at the end, it was his call. The bigger part that we get to see here is that there's really no training for the job. You kind of just go in it. I mean, they don't give you a how to be president for dummies guide, although this year maybe they should. But yeah, he just had to trust people that were in the roles and who gave those recommendations to him. And then one of my favorite parts of the interview that I thought was super funny was Trump then says he got lots of media coverage, more so than all the others, but he didn't know why. And this was Rogan's response.
I always got more publicity than other people. I don't know exactly why. Maybe you can tell me why.
Oh, I could definitely tell you. You said a lot of wild shit.
Maybe. Maybe
He
that's
said a lot of wild shit, and then CNN, in all their brilliance, by highlighting your wild shit, made you much more popular.
Yeah, Joe did make a good point. Like CNN did take his wild and made it way more popular, which made people want to like look at him because they were like, oh, he doesn't sound like a regular politician. We want change. Let's go with him. And honestly, I do think people are really frustrated by all the rehearsed fake answers given by people and by media bias. That's literally why I started this show, The Glass Room, so that we can look at both sides and have a very clear, transparent view. And speaking of wild shit that Trump says, take a look at this.
because you cannot be voting for Kamala. Kamala, you're not a Kamala person. Without speaking to you, I think I know you maybe almost as well as your wife.
Again, Trump's unfiltered conversations is one of the main driving points behind his popularity. And I can see why people rally behind the excitement. It's just very different from previous leaders and current politicians. Joe also brought up how during the debate, the fact checking was used far more on Trump than it was Kamala, even though there was things to fact check on both sides. And I actually have seen both sides of the political spectrum agree with that fact. I mean, it's almost impossible to have an unbiased debate, especially when humans are moderating or fact checking, because everyone has their own personal opinions and they will use that to make one candidate look better than the other. It's just the way it's going to work. That being said, Rogan moved on to the next point where he asked Trump if he was serious about the proposal of removing income tax and replacing it with tariff. As a response, Trump kind of went on a tangent. He talked about old presidents, meetings he used to have, how much money America used to have, and then he kind of went into the UFC. But Rogan did bring him back to the point.
Your weave is getting wide. We're getting wide with this weave.
But isn't it
I want
much
to bring it
better?
back to tariffs.
But
yeah, he went all over the place. Trump did eventually make his way back to the tariff conversation and explained that he wanted to put tariffs on imports coming into the country from countries like China, like Taiwan, which would heighten that likelihood that those countries would rather open up factories and plants in the US because that would probably be cheaper than paying those tariffs. He also mentioned how in his previous presidency, he was going to utilize this to start paying off the deficit. However, the deficit did increase during his time, which Rogan questions.
One of the criticisms of your administration was with tax cuts and with tariffs, you increased the deficit. What was the strategy behind that? And did you think it was going to increase the deficit?
we were ready to rock and roll, and then we had the COVID thing.
To be honest, he's not wrong. Of course, the deficit is going to go up during a global pandemic. That would have happened under any president's rule because they would have to provide loans for businesses that are closing. People weren't allowed to go out and buy products from those businesses. He also mentioned that he cut regulations on building infrastructure, products, etc., which stems from environmental concerns that may be too over the top. Now, according to Forbes, the administration claims that in fiscal year 2020, it eliminated $144 billion in overall regulatory costs across the board. So it seems like the regulation cut did end up helping, and he wasn't really lying about that. Rogan and Trump then switched to the notoriously controversial topic of climate change, talking about environmentalism being one of the most overregulated sections because they make a lot of money by forcing people to pay extreme fees for building infrastructure in places that it may not even have that bad of an impact. So everything we've talked about so far took place in pretty much the first hour. I know that's pretty quick to go through it, but I really cut out a lot of Trump's rambling. However, the second and third hour really ramped it up. They brought up Hillary and how in 2016 she denied the election results and how many other Democrats have also done the same thing. But then Trump did it and everybody acted like it was blasphemy. They then jumped in to talk about KamalaHarris's interviews, her abilities to talk or lack thereof. And Rogan makes a pretty good point defending her.
There's something wrong with her.
Well, I think it's pressure. I think the pressure and the scrutiny, you've been a celebrity for a long time and you understand what this is like. But for someone who's in her late 40s, who becomes the vice president, who runs for president, becomes the vice president, and then all of a sudden the weight of the world is on your shoulders and there's all these people paying attention. A lot of people clam up.
Now, I think this is a really good point from Rogan. I mean, I couldn't imagine being thrust into such a position of power so quickly when at the same time you've got everybody criticizing every little thing you do. Like when she cackles, for example, people tell her not to cackle, and then the next time she might accidentally cackle, and in her head she's like, oh shit, I just cackled. Again, not saying Trump is the right choice either, just saying I want someone that can handle this stuff. After Trump ragged on Kamala a little bit, they continued on to the Afghanistan failure, where a bunch of equipment was left by Biden, and since Kamala is saying that they kind of both made decisions together, a lot of other people are now pointing out that it's her failure too. Trump mentioned that from that point onwards, countries didn't really respect us, which is what led to Putin's desire to take over Ukraine. They continued to talk a little bit more about that war and what Trump may have done differently to prevent it, like having oil prices super high to mitigate the desire for war because of how costly the war would then be, and the fact that he had a better relationship with Putin and the Chinese president, but none of this is really new information. Rogan then starts to talk about RFK, and he asked Trump, is there anybody that really opposed you two working together? And here's Trump's response.
Not work with him. Have there been people
Did not
that are
work with
reaching
who?
RFK Jr.?
Yes, but I would say that the Big Pharma?
I definitely think it makes sense that Big Pharma would oppose RFK and Trump working together, especially because a lot of the medication that they make and prescribe people is only needed as a result of chemicals and negative substances that are implanted in our food. So if RFK came in to clean up the food industry, then Pharma would lose a lot of money. And both sides of the political spectrum are against Big Pharma, which is good because we all know there's something going on. For the next 20 minutes, they literally just talk about how does Trump stay healthy. And he attributes it to genetics, playing golf, staying active, being outside. And then they talk about the fact that Trump tends to ramble. And here was Trump's response.
And my speeches last a long time because of the weave, I weave stories into it. And if you just read a teleprompter, nobody's going to be very exciting. You got to weave it out. So but you always have to, as you say, you always have to get right back to it.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's no good. But the weave is very, very important. Very few weavers around.
I mean, after watching that, it makes me think, like, when will the weave become terminology? Like, honestly, put that on a shirt. No, but seriously, acknowledging the fact that he rambles and calling it the weave was definitely a smart move, because when Biden would ramble or say things that didn't quite make sense, he would deny that he said that or claim that he wasn't rambling, etc. And no, I don't enjoy Trump's rambling. I'm one of those people that talks fast, so I'm like, come on, get to the point. But he does kind of just seem to be the storyteller. It kind of reminds you of your grandpa. And that sometimes goes well and sometimes does not. And the last big point that Trump made, which is also not new, is that he believes the election was fraud in 2020. Now, what he explains here is actually totally different than how the media portrayed it. He wasn't saying people were sending in fake ballots, but he was saying that the media was manipulating others into believing things like the Russian hoax, propaganda, covering Hunter Biden laptop story. The fake news from these stories strayed people away from voting for him. So Rogan goes one step further. He asked specific examples of how Trump was robbed in the election, and here was his response.
In many cases, they didn't get it.
What things?
Anything.
Legislative approval,
like for extensions of the voting, for voting earlier, for this,
right.
For all different things.
So according to Trump, it was the false headlines that led to a downturn in his polls. Now, there definitely is an argument you could make from that. You could say that the media making all these lies up definitely did lead to election interference. But at the same time, the media has always done this. I mean, even if you look back into the 1500s, like the coffee house era in England, when you look at the satirical literature, like it was censored, it was taken out of some places. Some people couldn't talk about it, some people could, all depending on the king and the government at that time. So it's not really anything new, which, don't get me wrong, doesn't make it right. It just shows that the media has always been pretty twisted. So I really like that Rogan keeps pushing. He says, what can be done to actually fix voter fraud? He brings up the two things being mail-in ballots and breaking into voting machines. And here is Trump's response.
Unless you have paper ballots, it can never be an honest election. That's a big statement.
So this conversation did end up going into a little bit of a conspiracy theory, sparking the idea that mail-in ballots during COVID were made by design so that voter fraud could work. To be honest, I have relatives that passed away, and even after they passed away, they received voting ballots in the mail. Like, I definitely could have just filled it out and sent it in. Obviously, I didn't, but the possibility was there. Rogan then followed up all this voting fraud stuff by asking about voter ID and how it's no longer needed, which is a very controversial topic. And so Rogan asked Trump, why do you think they don't want voter ID? And Trump responds by saying this.
When you go to a grocery store, you give ID. But for a vote, it's supposed to be a sacred thing, and it should be a sacred thing. No voter ID, because they want to cheat.
I do think it's interesting that the Democratic Party, who did stop building the wall and a lot of illegal immigrants came through, are the same people that don't want people to have voter IDs. And I could see that leading to illegal immigrants voting, which is definitely a possibility, but I don't know if that's their goal. That seems like a very big conspiracy. Then that conversation quickly took a turn into the normal Trump stuff about illegal immigration bringing in sex and drug trafficking and all that. And then we get to the last 15 minutes of the episode, which I think are the most interesting part. They talk about both the JFK files and aliens. In relation to the JFK files, Trump said he's read about 50% of the files, but did not release it because some people mentioned in those files are still living.
When there are living people, you generally tend not to want to do it. When people are still living.
Living people that formerly work for the government.
For the government, and living people that were somehow involved in it, and you tend not to do that. But it's time to open them.
What Trump says here kind of insinuates that the people that are still living, maybe former members of the government, that were actually involved in the case. But Trump does quickly switch away from that topic and goes right into aliens, which gets Joe Rogan excited like a kid in a candy store. Check this out.
A lot of interest in the people coming from space, you know.
Yes.
And I know you're interested in that.
Oh, I'm very interested in that. How much did they tell you about that?
A lot.
Really?
Yeah.
What'd they tell you? How much can you tell? How's that work? Is it like super top secret? Tell me.
He's just dying to know. And Trump talked around it a little bit and claimed he wasn't super interested, but he did talk to some pilots about it. And here's what they said when he interviewed them.
I interviewed jet pilots, and they said, we saw things, sir, that were very strange. Like a round ball, but it wasn't a comet or a meteor. And it was going 4 times faster than an F-22, which is a very fast plane, you know.
In the last couple of minutes, they circle back to the war with Ukraine and how he would stop it, which he said he would do it with tariffs. I mean, Trump really is a businessman through and through, which is why people do tend to like him. He doesn't play the same game as the other politicians, and I think the entertainer side of him is what tends to get him in trouble with the media, with the outlandish shit that he says. And overall, I thought Rogan sitting down with Trump was insightful. It was cool to see him in a normal, uncensored, plus unedited manner, but I do think the 3-hour conversation didn't provide as many answers as I was hoping for because he weaved. I think Rogan tried his best to get answers out of Trump, and I think he did a pretty good job, but at the end of the day, Trump is running for office and he's good at being slippery. Let me know your thoughts about the Trump and Rogan episode down in the comment. As always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss any videos. I'm Joe Wheatley, and thanks for joining me in the Glass Room.